I think what people don't understand is now that the system that Chainlink has become is actually a system that is going to set the standard for how society and how financial markets do transactions.
Today I sit down with crypto veteran and Chainlink co-founder Sergey Nazarov.
In this car analogy, I think we're going from like the horse and buggy to the car,
as he shares his outlook for cryptocurrency into 2026.
If the real world asset space in general is at like the 300-400 billion mark, I think it can easily go to 3-4-5 trillion.
We talk how high the Bitcoin price could grow.
I mean, at that point, you're way past $1 million per Bitcoin. You're way past that. You're probably at like
what's next for Chainlink.
It's on track for this year in very positive ways.
And with this breaking news, the introduction of a Chainlink strategic reserve, Sergey, I have to ask, what is the Chainlink strategic reserve? And what does this mean for me?
So the Chainlink Strategic Reserve is meant to answer, very specific questions about how off-chain revenue relates to the Chainlink system. So there have been questions in the past about, hey, there's all this adoption of Chainlink in the on-chain world by DeFi and on various blockchains, but there's also all this adoption that you see in the capital markets by various chains, by various enterprises in various parts of the global financial system in different stages of adoption, from POC to pilot to some folks already being in production. And there's been a question of, okay, well, how does all of that enterprise activity of different types and different stages then relate back to the system? And this is, a question that many different protocols and systems have that have a lot of off-chain adoption, or a lot of adoption in places outside of the on-chain transactions. And so what the Chainlink Strategic Reserve does is it uses the payment abstraction layer, so the Chainlink system that converts revenue into Link. And now with this new launch, we're basically showing that you're able to convert on-chain revenue as well as off-chain revenue. So the on-chain revenue that's being paid into various Chainlink services was already in some cases getting converted and getting put through the payment abstraction layer in small amounts as it was getting tested. But now we're going to kind of at the next stage where you have the off-chain revenue, which is the enterprise implementation, maintenance, support, and adoption revenue, also in the process of now gradually and partially getting converted into Link through the payment abstraction layer. And what the Chainlink Strategic Reserve is where a significant portion of that Link that is converted will then sit. So it'll sit in this strategic reserve. We don't expect it to be used or moved or needed for a number of years. We do expect it at some point to be used for the growth and the success of the Chainlink network. But really, it's a reserve that we expect to grow in the coming months. And we see a lot of adoption of Chainlink now in both the on-chain revenue side of the equation, but increasingly and even more in this off-chain revenue world, where you have various enterprises needing implementation of Chainlink, needing maintenance, needing support, needing additional Chainlink implementation and the ability to use Chainlink in their systems, because Chainlink just does so many things now. It does compliance, it does data, it does cross-chain, it does identity, it does all these things. And a lot of that basically gets adopted via these off-chain implementations, right? So they're not necessarily paid for on chain. And this has been a question. And so now we're resolving that question, which we think is a good thing because it provides clarity to people about how the Chainlink system works in both an on-chain revenue and an on-chain transaction and usage sense, as well as an off-chain revenue and off-chain transaction usage sense. So it's hopefully creating clarity for the Chainlink community and the crypto community and everybody in general.
So do I have this right, that the more Chainlink is mass adopted and the more it's used, a small amount of the fees will go into taking Link off the open market and putting it in this reserve? Is that fair?
Right now, the way the process is working is that there's been hundreds of millions in revenue created, and that is substantially in the off-chain portion. And what we're starting to do is we're starting to take that off-chain revenue and convert it into Link and put it into this reserve. Now, I can't predict exactly what's going to happen in the future. I don't control everything that happens in the future. But generally speaking, what's happened now is that we've reached this kind of threshold where there's hundreds of millions in revenue created. And so this reserve seems like a logical logical positive thing to do. The thing that I do expect to happen is that the enterprise adoption of Chainlink, in my personal opinion, should continue. I'm seeing a lot of adoption by large enterprises of all kinds in all different stages of Chainlink adoption. And now, after many years of seeing them in all these different stages, we're seeing a lot of them start to shift more and more towards the, hey, let's go to production. Let's actually, do something real. A lot of the global financial system, a lot of the blockchain community, a lot of the different enterprises that we work with are now seeking to go live into production. And my experience is that when people go live into production, that's when they need to start, paying for implementation, support, maintenance, all of these key things. And so instead of just remaining in a very opaque state where it wasn't clear to people, what that was, we're kind of starting to create, the early stages of this clarity. And we're making it very clear that the reserve is built up through both on-chain revenue as well as the off-chain revenue from this integration, implementation, maintenance, and support stream of revenue.
Sergey, was inspiration for this the US Bitcoin strategic reserve or Michael Saylor accumulating Bitcoin? Is that the impetus of this now, or was this always the plan?
I think that there was always a path to some kind of off-chain revenue that was going to be paid for the implementation, integration, maintenance, and support of many different Chainlink services. I think there was some thinking about how is that going to be utilized so that it benefits the protocol and the system. And that is something that we have been thinking about for some time. And the strategic reserve seems like the right current version of how to make that compatible, right? So it seems like the right current version of where you have a portion of on-chain revenue, portion of off-chain revenue, and they're both going back towards benefiting the protocol. Is it related to the Bitcoin strategic reserve? It's not really that related. It is related to the more positive crypto environment, I would say. What I would say is that doing all kinds of new programs, new approaches to how the system works, testing these things out and seeing if they work the way you want them to work is definitely a lot easier and more straightforward and less risky in a positive environment. So I would say that the Bitcoin strategic reserve is a consequence of that positive environment. I would say a lot of the stuff we've started doing with Build and with other programs that we have in that was launched is a result of that positive environment. The Chainlink strategic reserve is also able to happen because there's now a positive environment towards crypto companies doing more innovative things and finding ways to make their economics and their systems and their revenues work in ways that are innovative, right? It's a lot harder to innovate when you're in a state of fear and you're afraid that someone's going to come and tell you did something wrong. But now that we're in a state where things are more positive and innovation is being encouraged, Chainlink has always innovated on a lot of different things. It's just done it in a risk adjusted way because the Chainlink standard is adopted by so many institutions. So we need to be cautious about how the Chainlink standard evolves, how the protocols are adopted, how the revenue is made to interact back with the system, so that we can maintain a certain level of kind of a perception and a reality of reliability, and that we're doing everything the right way. And so that's probably one of the big factors that affected the Bitcoin strategic reserve in us, is that it's now okay to do these innovative things around crypto. That's probably the main similarity.
Under what conditions will the link eventually be withdrawn from the strategic reserve? Months down the line, years down the line, what conditions would that be used for?
So that hasn't been fully defined. We've just decided to do the Chainlink strategic reserve. We have the payment abstraction layer working. That was one of the dependencies that needed to be working on a technical level. We wanted to reach a certain level of revenue, and now there's hundreds of millions in this off-chain revenue. So you reach a kind of threshold there, and also you're in an environment where you can innovate and do interesting new things and try things out, right? We are able to say that we don't plan to use the Chainlink strategic reserve for multiple years at this point. So that is something that we do know. Generally speaking, the Chainlink strategic reserve is there to benefit the system and the protocol in the future, right? So let's say the Chainlink strategic reserve grows to a certain size, and there's a need to subsidize an Oracle network, or there's a need for some kind of program where you do something like build, or you do something else, or there's a need to build something for the protocol, or there's a need to do something else that benefits the protocol and its growth. It's generally good to have, I think, a growing pool of Link that is available for that. But instead of starting it then, we've just decided to start it now. It isn't something we plan to use in the next couple of years. We aren't relying on it in any way in that sense. This is something we're kind of trying out, and we think it'll go well, and we think it's the right thing to do, and it's a good way to make payment abstraction and the on-chain revenue and the off-chain revenue piece work well together in the system. So that's kind of what we're exploring and seeing where it goes.
I want to ask you big picture crypto questions, but just a couple more on this. Talk to me about the economics. Does this change the scarcity at all if now every single time, transactions are happening, some of this is getting put into the reserve?
Yeah, so things that affect the economics that directly are generally things I don't comment on. The thing that I can tell you is that we're seeing a lot of adoption of the Chainlink standard, and the Chainlink standard is expanding the scope of what it's able to do. So in terms of how exactly that plays out in the market, that's not something I can predict. In terms of, do I see a lot of Chainlink adoption? Do I see Chainlink consistently winning many off-chain enterprise implementation, integration, maintenance, and support key roles in various key implementations of advanced next generation smart contracts, and the various plans that big blockchains have? I clearly see that, that's public, that's true, and that's happening. I see a lot of adoption of Chainlink on chain in various ways. Chainlink's put the most data on chain of any system. Chainlink has done a lot of great and growing things for the DeFi community. So that DeFi market is also growing. That's a lot where a lot of the on-chain consumption happens. That is generally the barometer that I pay attention to personally. So I pay attention to personally to the barometer of, hey, is the Chainlink standard for how data interacts with chains and contracts, for how cross-chain works, for how compliance works, for how identity works, for how AI interacts and is used in blockchain applications. Are those standards getting adopted? So that's the thing that I tend to pay the most attention to. The market dynamics will play out however they play out. I don't control that. I can't predict that. I can't give people any guidance on that in any clear way, unfortunately. But I can say that me and a lot of the people in the Chainlink community and a lot of great folks are spending a lot of time building the Chainlink standard into something that really does solve a lot of these critical industry problems. And I think Chainlink has a reputation for already doing that successfully with DeFi and other categories of our industry. And so my expectation is that our industry will massively grow, and that Chainlink will continue to be a piece of critical core infrastructure that helps accelerate that growth, has a key part in powering that growth, and has a key part in getting revenue in exchange for providing security and reliable core infrastructure, enabling and accelerating that growth, right? So that's kind of the high level picture and thing that I pay attention to.
Sergey, what haven't we mentioned about this? This is so new. I don't even know what to ask. Is there anything we haven't covered?
I think we've covered most of it. It's a pretty straightforward program, realistically. There's nothing, particularly complicated about it. You see a lot of on-chain adoption of Chainlink, and you see a lot of off-chain adoption of Chainlink, where there's announcements of various chains, of various institutions, of various different groups adopting Chainlink. We just wanted to clarify how the on-chain adoption goes through payment abstraction, as well as how through some of the off-chain adoption and the revenue can also go through payment abstraction, right? So we just wanted to create this clarity. It's clarity that people wanted from us. It's a lot easier for us to create clarity in a positive environment. So, that is definitely a contributing factor that people may or may not appreciate fully. So we've kind of just reached a logical point at which to do this, where payment abstraction is built and working. We've reached a certain threshold in the amount of revenue that's generated off-chain as well as on-chain, and the environment in which you can do and explain and launch a program like this is sufficiently positive that you can launch this program, you can put it out there, you can see how it works, and it's kind of a safe and logical thing to do. So it's pretty straightforward. It should fundamentally answer the simple question of, hey, how does this off-chain adoption that I'm seeing separately from the on-chain transactions, how could that in some way relate back to the Chainlink system and to the protocol and to the standard and its growth and its adoption in the future? So hopefully it answers that question. People have the clarity they need, and we always want to create that for folks. We just need to do it in the right way, at the right time, in the right environment, to make sure we're doing everything the right way.
And every week, like I'll be able to go on X and see, or on the website or whatever, and see the growth milestone. Like, oh, it got this much bigger this week. Is that going to be daily or weekly or live?
Right now, the current plan is for weekly. So there's a current plan for weekly.
That's awesome. That's going to be exciting.
I'm excited. I think it's a good and interesting program. Hopefully, it provides the clarity that people want, and hopefully, it's something that works well. I'm excited about it.
Sergey, let's zoom out for the final 8 to 10 minutes of this and just talk big picture crypto. I love how you can explain in simple terms where we are now versus where crypto DeFi could be in the future. With tokenization, it's so early. Do you think we're, in the future, we'd see a 10x of tokenization, things brought on chain, 100x? Like, what is the potential?
Yeah, so I personally am definitely in the 10x at a minimum camp, because you haven't even had the institutions that know how to tokenize things really well start to tokenize things. So you had startups try to tokenize things, and most of those startups have then needed to get a counterparty as a custodian that holds the actual underlying asset. So when you look at, for example, most stablecoins are the most commonly tokenized thing outside of cryptocurrencies. For cryptocurrencies, NFTs, meme coins, utility tokens, these things, you don't really need anyone to hold anything in the real world, because those systems just work on chain in and of themselves. But if you even look at stablecoins, pretty much every stablecoin has a highly regulated custodian that holds its treasuries, right? So what does that mean? That means good luck making a stablecoin if you don't have a custodian like a Bank of New York Mellon or some big custody bank holding the treasuries for you, or Cantor Fitzgerald in the case of Tether, or whoever Circle uses, or whoever the other stablecoins use. So what does that tell you? That tells you that because we're dealing with real world things, we need institutions that can secure the real world things, right? You need you can't just have a blockchain thing that says it has a relationship with a real world thing. You need something in the real world that actually lets you have a claim on the real world thing. In the case of stable coins, that's treasuries and a custodian. In the case of real estate coins, that's some kind of legal structure related to real estate. In the case of gold coins, that's some kind of, once again, custodian holding the gold, right? So if you're talking about tokenization, you're pretty much, in my opinion, almost exclusively talking about real world assets and real world asset tokenization. And then you're talking about the legal frameworks, the custodians, the traditional financial system, giving you an ability to tie an off-chain claim to an on-chain token, right? That's the basic thing that's going on. And so if you look at it from that perspective, what percentage of the things that are owned off-chain, whether that's gold, whether that's cash, whether that's various commodities, whether that's equities, what percentage of those off-chain things are currently able to be claimed or able to be controlled or in some sense owned by a surrogate on-chain token? And the answer is it's like below 1%. It's extremely low. It's far below 1% when you add up all the categories I just said. And so I think if the real world asset space in general is at like the 300, 400 mark, 400 billion mark, I think it can easily go to 3, 4, 5 trillion across those categories. I think tokenized cash, which is basically stable coins in their current state, in the current form, will go to at least 2 trillion. And then you have tokenized funds, tokenized equities, tokenized commodities. That's the real way to measure it, right? You should just look at what percentage of all these off-chain things, equities, commodities, cash, what percent of that globally is now represented on chain. And I think once you get to 10% or 20%, then you can start asking a question of like, well, how much of it is really going to do that? But right now, if you even go to 5%, you've more than 10x'd. So I think just the simple basic arithmetic of it suggests way more than 10x, in my opinion.
Sergey, we can cut this question if you don't want to answer this next one, but just for a gauge, are you one of the people that believe that, hey, if Bitcoin doesn't go to zero, it's probably going to 1 million just because the digital gold narrative? Or do you think that other cryptocurrencies are going to be even more value and it's the DeFi that will eventually be number one?
I think Bitcoin as digital gold is something that benefits from instability, market instability, government instability, geopolitical instability. All of this instability, generally speaking, leads to the search for safe haven assets, to assets that aren't necessarily yield bearing, but that are going to serve a kind of de-risking function. Now it's interesting and kind of funny that you have a new asset type that's pretty young that people are starting and already in many cases view as a safe haven asset that'll de-risk them. But it actually makes sense when you think about it through the lens of diversification. So diversification is the big word, is this, I would say diversification is the single biggest defining word of the last, I don't know, maybe 50 years, maybe 70 years of asset management, where your optimal strategy is not to invest or hold or have 2 or 3 things in one sector. Unless you're a really great professional investor of some kind like Warren Buffett or someone. The vast majority of people in the asset management world will recommend to the vast majority of everyone else that they engage in diversification. And so what does that mean? What that basically means is if something can become a type of asset, like a safe haven asset, right? Like this Bitcoin thing is not correlated with the NASDAQ. It's actually it's uncorrelated to it, and it's correlated to growing instability, financial markets instability, government instability, geopolitical instability, whatever their instability for whatever collection of ideas that people might have in their mind, what right or wrong, whatever those ideas are. If that is an idea that appears, then the people that allocate capital and the people that tell people how to allocate capital will say, oh, okay, so I have this thing. How does it fit into diversification? Oh, okay, the answer is it behaves this way. And if I want to be hedged against that, I should have some of it. And so that is the fundamental, Bitcoin digital gold thesis that I think in a world of instability will work. It will work in my opinion personally. I can see how if you have instability and Bitcoin is seen as a hedge or as something that's inversely correlated with instability, or it grows in proportion to being, the whole safe haven narrative. And then people say, hey, I need 5% in gold and I need 2.5% in Bitcoin. If everybody who allocates capital puts 2.5% in Bitcoin, Bitcoin is going to grow significantly. So that's the basic thesis there.
How much? Like grow like does it cap off like after like I don't know. I see these charts all the time that Bitcoin is just 0.5% of global money or stuff like that. Can it get to 1% of global money? Or I guess 2.5?
I mean, I could. I haven't seen exactly those charts. I would look at what percentage of the largest asset managers, portfolios, sovereign wealth funds, maybe even central banks, possibly if the Bitcoin strategic reserve from the US goes in the right direction. What percentage of that universe of folks that allocate capital have Bitcoin, and what percent? And if the answer is they as a group in total have less than 0.5% allocated into Bitcoin, then you only have two questions. Question number one is, will global instability increase? And if the answer is no, then okay, maybe safe haven assets aren't as valuable. And then the second question is, will Bitcoin be viewed as a safe haven asset? Will it be viewed as an asset that is not going to be exposed to the same risks as Nvidia equity or real estate ownership or whatever other asset types? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, more instability, yes, Bitcoin's a safe haven asset, and the answer to the first question is below 0.5% or below 1% of total capital allocation globally, then that's the answer. The answer is I think maybe everyone could get to a few percent of Bitcoin if the other two questions are yeses. And I think that number is far beyond this number. I think generally that will always help our industry. That'll always get everyone to pay more attention to our industry, so that'll be positive. The rest of the industry has other things that it does. So I think Bitcoin adoption will generally be positive for our industry, but there are so many other innovative things in our industry, and they don't have the Bitcoin digital gold thesis. So they will not do the same thing.
The only reason that I ask is because when I hear these numbers, tens of trillions are going to be tokenized, maybe hundreds of trillions, whatever eventually. I just think Bitcoin does one thing really well. And in this world, it's hard to imagine the world being digitized, tokenized. Does that, I would never, I'm not asking you to predict the future. Nobody can. But does that lead to something bigger than right now what's leading the crypto market, Bitcoin, in the future?
I think tokenization leads to something bigger from a technology and a financial markets and a kind of change in how the financial system and even governments and society works. Because of the hundreds of trillions that we're talking about currently existing off chain, I do believe that vast majority of that will end up on chain on some time scale over the next few years. Even if 5% ends up on chain, this industry is a huge success. If 10% ends up on chain, it's a massive success. It's like beyond massive. And so I think it'll go way, the stuff in the equity markets, commodity markets, all of this stuff settles in weird ways. Collateral management is really not great. You have huge costly errors about data and reporting and corporate actions that cost literally hundreds of millions every year. You have all this fraud, you have all this random shit that most people don't understand because they're not they're not building the financial system, they're using the financial system as users, so they don't need to know how it works, just like they don't know how a car works, but they drive around in it. But really, yeah, in this car analogy, I think we're going from like the horse and buggy to the car. I think that's what's going to happen. And so the vast majority of people will be riding around in cars. It is my expectation. So the total value of what's on a blockchain, I think, will be tokenized non-Bitcoin stuff. So if Bitcoin reaches 5, 10, 20 trillion, whatever number it reaches, the only way that Bitcoin represents more value than all the tokenized stuff is either that tokenization doesn't happen and Bitcoin's the only thing that keeps growing in value along with a few other tokens, or tokenization happens, you have hundreds of trillions of dollars in value on chain. You have Bitcoin, which is also on chain in the 5, 10, 20 trillion camp. Or not 5, 10, 20 trillion, actually. And you basically have hundreds of trillions tokenized, and you have people decide that 50% of their portfolio for their country's sovereign wealth fund or their college university pension fund or their retirement fund will be Bitcoin. I mean, I don't see that I don't see that happening. I don't see all the sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and retirement funds of everybody suddenly deciding I'm not going to own equity, I'm not going to own commodities, I'm going to go 50% into Bitcoin. I mean, that's possible. I mean, at that point, you're way past a million per Bitcoin. You're way past that. You're probably at like tens of millions per Bitcoin at that point. But that isn't really how diversification usually looks. So barring something like that, the on-chain world will be predominantly tokenized off-chain things, equities, commodities, funds. And the thing that'll actually do is it'll change our industry by definition. So our industry will now be defined by all those off-chain tokenized things more than it'll be defined by cryptocurrencies. Because by the numbers, our industry will be about that. When people think about the blockchain and on-chain and our industry, they won't think about it as cryptocurrency. They'll think about it as tokenization, because that's the thing that has the most value inside of it in our industry, which will be a great thing for our industry and also a good thing for Bitcoin.
Sergey, what can we expect from Chainlink into 2026?
Chainlink is in a pretty unique and interesting place now, because the systems and designs that the Chainlink community has put forward to institutions, to blockchain teams, to the DeFi community have basically, in many cases, proven to be right. And now the amount of production stuff from these teams, whether those are governments with central banks, whether those are capital markets, participants like asset managers or banks or financial market infrastructures, or whether those are DeFi, there's more production usage. Like the amount of total blockchain developers is not at the 500,000 mark. We're very far below 500,000 blockchain developers. I think we're below 200,000 or even 100,000. We're very far behind other categories of developer adoption, AI adoption, Web 2 adoption, things like that. So what's happening now is that the US government and other governments have legitimized blockchains and smart contracts and tokenization as a kind of preferred method for ownership, for transactions, for the financial system, for all these things. We work with multiple governments. We work with multiple large institutions. We are seeing them massively accelerate towards production. And so Chainlink plays a pretty unique role there because, I mean, how are they going to get to production? What are they going to do? Like they get a chain, they get a contract like ERC 3643 for tokenization, but then they're stuck. They need market data. They need connectivity to other chains. They need identity to comply with regulations. They need compliance. They need integration back into their own system, which they invested, hundreds of millions in over decades. They need reporting. They need all these things. Other than the chain and the contract itself, which the chain will come from various different chains, and the contract will come from various contract standards like ERC 3643. Other than those, Chainlink is the only system that gives you all the other ones. It's the only one. So if you want to go live with a stable coin and you want proof of reserves and you want cross-chain and you want identity to do compliance, Chainlink is the only system right now that can provide all of that in a single implementation, in a single integration, and that can help you maintain that, support that, make sure that works, and make sure that it works in line with the regulatory requirements that your local government regulator has setting for you, who Chainlink has been in conversations with in various ways. The Chainlink community and various people there have been in conversations with for years. That's the other thing people don't fully understand, is that there might be one or two people that do something on some chain where we're not on. That's fine. And that's great. And that's okay. I think some of those things might not be as secure. They might create risk. If they have failures, that's a problem. But that's people's choice. I think what people don't understand is now that the system that Chainlink has become is actually a system that is going to set the standard for how society and how financial markets do transactions. So that's actually probably the other thing, the main thing, if I were to think about what Chainlink is going to become. It's not just going to be a data oracle or a bridge oracle or an identity oracle or a compliance oracle. You actually need all those things to create a method of transaction. And that's what everyone wants, right? All the large institutions want to transact. All the DeFi protocols want to transact. The DeFi protocols institutions want to transact with each other. And so you really need a way to do transactions. And transactions are complex. Transactions are not just what they were at the beginning of our industry, where I was on a chain and you were on a chain, and I sent you 3 coins and you sent me 3 coins, and we exchanged our coins and our transaction was done. That doesn't work as a transaction anymore, because now you have you on one chain, me on another chain. We need data to value what the transaction's about. We need compliance and identity. We need to synchronize with systems. We need to report. We need to do all this stuff, right? So that's really what I think Chainlink is becoming, is the system of transaction. And then the other really exciting thing that is still on track at this point is the Chainlink runtime environment. So the Chainlink runtime environment is the place that I hope, and I think more and more people are seeing the clear path to now, where this system of transacting, the system of how to do a transaction efficiently and securely and reliably against the set of global standards that are widely adopted and accepted as secure and reliable, is made simple. So really what you want to get to is a global set of standards that the institutions adopt and the DeFi community adopts. So they're now on the same standards so they can transact easily. And then you need an environment in which you can define those transactions very easily. That environment still doesn't exist today, which makes CRE very attractive from my point of view. Like if you want to define how your transaction works from a data, cross-chain, compliance, and other key points of view, there is no one place where you can write some code and your transaction and your contract can work. That complexity is still slowing things down. And we've been dealing with that complexity for well over 7 years now. And I've personally been dealing with it for well over 7, 8 years. the speed at which I see people being able to build really complex smart contracts and really complex transactions in the CRE is kind of astounding for me personally, because I've seen people be able to build things inside of the Chainlink runtime environment in literally days, what would have been before taken weeks or months. And I
Wow.
know, yeah, it's really cool. It's for me, really reminds me of what it was like to make smart contracts before the EVM. So before the EVM, what you had to do is you had to go to a blockchain and you had to convince the blockchain team to create what was called an opcode. So you literally had to build your smart contract into the code of the blockchain itself. And that was a multi-month, sometime year plus process. And then Ethereum and the EVM came along and says, why don't you just code up a smart contract and run it on a blockchain? And that was like, people's minds went like, they're like, whoa, like, wow. And the real value of that was the simplicity, the reduction of complexity. But we're at a similar place now where it's like, hey, I want to build a smart contract. It has to work across chains. It has to use all this data. It has to comply with identity. It has to do these three other things. It has to use an AI to do risk management. It has to do these things. And there is no way to just build that in one place where you just write the code, it runs, and your smart contract works. The CRE, I think, could be this place, which for me is very exciting. So I think it's on track for this year in very positive ways. For we're using it with institutions, we're using it with DeFi teams, getting a lot of great feedback. It's on track for a very kind of positive initial launch with its initial functionality, I think sometime this year. And then if that initial launch goes well, I think next year could be a good year for its adoption.
Huge. Sergey, thank
Yeah.
you so much for taking the time. Links for everything down below. Final thoughts for the Altcoin Daily Army.
It's a very exciting time to build things in our industry. And I would make the most of it.